Oh, hey, what's going on, class? How are you guys? Thought I'd be outside, but now as I'm seeing it, it's like a total blind spot right behind me. But I think you guys can deal because it's nice outside. And why not be outside and teach this course to my whole neighborhood off my front porch? Um, so hope you guys are doing well and doing all the things you need to do to make your way through this crazy semester. Got the response papers. I'm aiming for end of next week to be the time when I'm finished with them. So wish me luck on that front. So I will get cracking. Questions? Anything? Anybody wondering about? We good? Good to, as we transition out of the case study into sort of applying it in different places and kind of expanding beyond just the story that we've been telling over and over and over again. Seem like we're okay. All right. So I guess I just want to open it up with a question about this U.S. versus Virginia case. And I'm curious if you guys were reminded of any other cases that we have already encountered in the course when you read U.S. versus Virginia. So anybody reminded of any other case, anything ring a bell and they're like, hey, that's pretty much just like this other case?
Well, I mean, it's
It
a lot.
talked about Sweat versus Painter. Like
Oh, Chris. Okay. Yeah,
hello.
I see it.
Yeah, and just how like I think I read this a few days ago, but I think one school is set up for women, but like was inadequate. So that kind of just like reminded me of, wasn't that Sweat versus Painter the one about the Texas Law School and stuff, and they talk about it in that case? Yeah. So
yeah. So you mentioned the similarity in that there was a second school created after there was the challenge to the exclusionary policy of the first school, and the court ultimately found that the second school was inadequate. Yeah, Darius, see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just reminded back to like our class discussion regarding like Du Bois, and I guess the question, like, having such separation, is there going to be like inherently some disadvantages to that? And that was just the first thing that came to mind. Like, oh, I'm gonna try to make this connect. Obviously the question, I guess, asked for that, but just brainstorm about it. So
yeah, what we're seeing the same kind of idea of, at least in this instance, exclusion. I just want to put this out there as a possibility. Maybe this is an exclusion case rather than a separation case. And that may be a little bit of a different kind of thing, but there seems to be a connection, certainly to Sweat. It's almost like the Sweat case all over again. And then it's going to implicate, this topic is going to implicate a lot of the same things that we've talked about that have been thought through in the context of race. Chelsea, did you have something, or are you just going to say the same as Chris?
Same. Yep.
Okay. So how is this case different from Sweat? So Sweat, we had the University of Texas Law School, and they excluded African-American students. And then when challenged, they created the second law school, the one that would admit African-American students. And then the court had to consider whether or not this complied with the Equal Protection Clause. Here we have the VMI that does not admit female students. And when challenged, the response from Virginia is to create a second school, one that does admit female students, or in fact only admits female students, in the same way that the second institution in Texas only admitted African-American students. So it was a very similar situation brought to the court. But I'm curious, What's different? How are these different? Because they're different in a lot of ways as well. There's like the glaring obvious difference, but there's other differences. What are some of the differences? You can even start with the glaring obvious one. Looking for hands or panelists? What are we on? Panel 2 for today. Hands or panelists? What is the difference? Yeah, Chris, go ahead. You know what, Chelsea, you go this time, and then I'll come to Chris. So I don't want you to say the same thing as her, and then she gets to just say whatever Chris said.
Yeah, I mean, he'd probably be much more eloquent, but I mean, the glaring difference, right, is that it's gender, just like in race, is one, and then, but one of them that I thought too was that like, with Sweat, it seemed more like individual, like that he was totally removed from anybody else because he was. I may be getting him and somebody else mixed up, but where he didn't have the ability to talk with like a group of peers. But in this one, like you still have the female, the single sex school, but you have peers that you like, that she wouldn't be completely removed from everybody. Like she wouldn't be in the schoolhouse, like up in the back. They would be in a separate one, but she would have peers at least. So
right. So I think you're thinking the McLaurin case where this is happening within a college, the separation within a college, and that is a difference from here in that there is a sort of separated institution, and that would be different from McLaurin. But I think Sweat actually it's pretty similar, right? They're in separate institutions. And you identified the glaring one, right? One is a racial classification and one is a sex-based classification. And I want to note, I'm going to continue to use the phrasing sex-based classification rather than gender, even though the book uses gender. And I sort of am open to any of you educating me on the sort of the nuanced difference between sex and gender. But from the way that I'm teaching it, this is a male-female binary sex classification, as opposed to what the law is starting to recognize with regard to gender, which is that it may not be as binary in terms of the eyes of the law, in terms of the experience of individuals as sex. So I'm going to use sex-based classification. That may not be right, but that's what we're going to go with. And so, again, if I'm doing it the wrong way, I encourage you guys to sort of push back and say, no, this is gender or whatever. And we can have that conversation. But before we do, let's keep unpacking this. So, Rachel, what's different? Sweat and U.S. versus Virginia?
This may be wrong, but I was also thinking the arguments are different too. Like they were saying that if women go to this school, it's going to be inherently destroy the program of this school because it was built for men, and just the fact that women would be there would just destroy that. And also they were talking about how women. Also I was just thinking about how it's different with a military school, that like I feel like there's a whole different dynamic with a military school and gender, and then a law school just more separating the races. I just think what
would the equivalent argument have been in Sweat to what the argument? I think you're right that this is a difference, that the defense here by the state is different than what it was in the Sweat versus Painter case. Can you imagine what the equivalent argument would have been in Texas?
I think it would have been that having like Black students come in this law school would inherently ruin the teaching of law in this school.
It can't be done.
It can't be done, which is just kind of a ridiculous argument. But yeah, I think the arguments are very different.
Yeah, so I think that they're actually making a more extreme, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, sexist argument in this case than the Texas government was making a racist argument in the Sweat case. Even though we know that the sort of social separation that was being enforced in the law school system within Texas was itself based on racism, there's not an open racist argument that that there's an inherent inability to teach law to students of different races at the same time, which is what they're saying is the case here. For this type of education, it is inherently impossible to have women included. So that's a good observation of a difference. Chris, have you been covered? Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, to build off of Rachel's point, like even with like when they create the all-female school, they even change, like it talks about in the text, like they even change like the modes of like the strategy of the school. So like it said that they de-emphasize military education and uses a cooperative method of education, which reinforces self-esteem. So this difference between the argument in the Sweat case is that, you know, you'll have two law schools, but they're still teaching, you know, they would be inferior based a bit on resources and whatnot, but they were still teaching the practice of law. Whereas here, you're going to a military school that's for females, and you're completely changing the structure of how you're even educating them.
Great. So it is actually not equal. The argument was being made in the Texas case that it actually was equal, right? They're using, in fact, at the earliest stages, the same professors. They, would come from the University of Texas to teach at the law school for African-American students. Here, they're explicitly saying this is not a matter of we're going to just do VMI and we're going to do it the exact same way. We're going to actually make this different. And so I guess my question for both Rachel and Sarah on this point, and anybody else can jump in if you like, what is underlying that? Those two differences. One is that we're actually going to provide a different program for female students. And the other is that it would not be possible for us to have the current program, the current VMI method, and have female students involved. And so what is underneath that? A belief that what?
Women are like inherently unequal.
Different, right? So
Different,
unequal, yeah. I mean, so you're saying unequal, and I think that means the same thing as different. Unequal suggests perhaps inferiority, but I think that, you know, as you read the opinion, you see like there's different, right? So that is something that trips up trying to translate race doctrine onto sex-based classifications. That it's not that whereas race, we, you know, whether we believe it or not, as a society, individuals and institutions, race is an illegitimate separator, right? We wouldn't say like there's, you know, the law wouldn't allow someone to say Black people are different from white people, Asian people are different from Latino people. Okay, the law wouldn't allow that kind of, and then therefore we're going to treat people differently just based on a racial classification. But here we're seeing, well, there's a temptation to have a different view when it comes to a sex-based classification, that actually there is a difference between men and women, and that difference could potentially, that's what the case is ultimately about, could translate into a justifiable distinction. Takesha, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was just thinking to go a question on what the difference is. I think there's an emphasis here on equity versus equality. So with equity being like just giving everybody what they need to be successful, and here in the VMI case, it was almost as if VMI was making the case that, yeah, we give women this experience, but it wouldn't be the same, and they wouldn't get the full potential of what this program is designed for. There's just certain things that we can't provide to women in this sense to be successful here, which is more important than equality, like just giving everybody the same experience, because it really won't be as beneficial as it is if it's just focused for men in this particular case.
Good. And in Sweat, what were they focusing on?
they were just focused on equality, everyone having the same experience or being able to take advantage of that same experience.
Good. And then the court in Sweat is building off that in order to come to its conclusion that, you know, the sort of intangible factors of this newly created law school couldn't possibly be the same as a well-reputed law school that, you know, the majority or a significant number of the members of the Texas bar are alumni from. And so, so that there's a good distinction. There's another difference. Does everybody, well, let's, so if Virginia is going to, we're going to put ourselves in the mind of Virginia defending VMI in this particular context. In Sweat, the argument was at least attempted that the exclusion of students from, of Black students from the University of Texas was not really exclusion. It was just a matter of, well, some students are going to go to one law school and other students are going to go to another law school. It's just kind of a matter of distributing who goes to what schools, okay? Prior, of course, to Sweat, were African Americans provided any option, any public law school option in the state of Texas? I see some head shakes, no, right? So there was an exclusion that was sought to be remedied by this new law school, which of course we know, you know, from the case that the court strikes down. What about women in higher education in Virginia? Are they excluded from higher education in the early 1990s? I'm again seeing some head shaking. So does that matter? Does it matter? Does it strengthen Virginia's case that they've got a bunch of schools and women can go to all but one? So what do y'all think? Does that help Virginia? Is that a difference here? Yeah, Heather?
I actually don't think so, because this person was trying to get into a military school, not a regular higher education school. And, you know, I've never been to military school, but I assume they teach different things. And I would assume that it wouldn't just be this military school denying women participation at that time, which is why it went to the Supreme Court. So no, they didn't have the same type of school that they wanted to go to in Virginia.
Okay, so this wasn't this. So you're saying this is actually an exclusion case, not a distribution case.
Yeah.
Okay, Caitlin.
The court makes a couple of notes that there were like 4 other female-only law schools within the state of Virginia, but then they started as female-only, but then they became co-educational. So I think that kind of points to, I don't know that necessarily answers your question, but that was just kind of historical background leading up to the case. And like what Heather was saying, there was no other military-based program that offered the same type of training to women in the state.
And so the fact that there's no other military option makes this, and repeating the same question as I did to Heather, makes it an exclusion case?
Um,
Let me ask you this. Would it be easier to win an exclusion case or a distribution case if you were the plaintiffs in this kind of case?
I'm trying to make sure I understand what you mean by exclusion, meaning that we're excluding women from this particular program versus.
Yeah, so if you think about it as like the government is providing a benefit, right? And depending on how you define that benefit, we can either say women are not allowed to have that benefit at all, which would be an exclusion case, or we could say women can't go to that particular school, but still can get the benefit. So if we define the benefit as higher education, well, clearly women are not excluded from higher education in Virginia. And so this is just one form of higher education. So that they would say that it's just a matter of distribution, or it's just Yeah. As opposed to this is the benefit and women can't get this benefit. Which is a better case for a plaintiff which is the better framing from a plaintiff's perspective, that this is exclusion or that this is just distribution?
I think that is what the plaintiffs are arguing, that it is an exclusion case. Yeah, and so I guess I'm saying this is a very similar setup to Sweat v. Painter, because even though there may have been other options for women in higher ed, there was not the same quality or caliber of option available to women as far as military training goes.
Did anybody see this in the opinion, that this is that the court is going out of its way to say that this is an exclusion case? How do they do that? So Caitlin has mentioned that there's this history of the female-only schools becoming co-ed and the VMI remaining exclusionary from a sex-based perspective. Takesha, how is the court doing this? Doing this work of making it a exclusion case?
I think from my understanding of the reading, it did a lot of focus on the historic trajectory of women being able to have the right to have education in the first place. So it talks about how in the 1920s, women weren't even included in the We the People when we're talking about voting. So I think it was just more so women having the opportunities accorded to men, so long as there's I don't know. I just feel like it's exclusionary. It talks about a lot of the historical cases, talking about the rights that women didn't have and how this new movement of women just wanting to have the same rights and equal opportunities. And they should have this right because we've been excluded for so long.
It's definitely an exclusion case. Yeah, it's definitely an exclusion case.
I can't find my...
Rachel, can you help us? How does the court make it an exclusion case? What is some of the language that they use?
So I'm going to try. I think what it is they were saying that this is a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. And in order for this to be remedied, there has to be, wait, let me get the language right. Is to eliminate the possible discriminatory effects of the past. And they said this parallel school that was opened up is not equal because it's a whole separate program. And this is what's in violation.
Great. And so they're excluded from
the equal opportunity that this school would give them because it's a different program they have.
Okay. And so we're getting very close. You guys are right on it that it's an exclusion. The court is reading it as an exclusion. Virginia was not arguing it as an exclusion. So the reason I'm hitting on this is because this is a strategic framing kind of fork, right? It's if you lose on whether this is an exclusion case or a distribution case, like let's say you're the plaintiff, you're going to lose the case, right? If this is just a distribution case, then it's hard to see how the plaintiffs, and I want to talk about the plaintiffs in a second, but it's hard to see how a plaintiff would win a case if it's just a distribution case. In fact, we've seen like Roberts, like Plessy, like the sort of lower court decisions in Brown were all like, oh, well, people got to go to school and they're going to school somewhere. And so what, the young girl in Boston has to walk a little farther to get to the school for African-American students. She's still going to school. And so it's really, really crucial from a strategic standpoint for a plaintiff to be able to say, no, I can go to school. And just like a plaintiff in this environment would be able to say, I can go to college in Virginia. Like, that's not the problem here. The problem is I can't go to this college. And so I need to make it an exclusion case in order to win. And y'all are picking up on that the court absolutely is biting that, right? And Justice Ginsburg is saying, yes, this is an exclusion case. And I just want to I'm trying to identify, and maybe it's here in the chat while I've been talking. Lindsay, I'm reading what you've put in the chat. what is the key word in what you've put in there that lets you know that this is an exclusion case, other than the word exclusion? What is the key word in it?
So they say exclusion, but it's exclusion from educational opportunities, and it's specifically from VMI's extraordinary opportunities for
Yeah.
military training.
Extraordinary opportunities, unique opportunities, one-of-a-kind opportunities that, yeah, they can go to other schools in Virginia, but they cannot get at other schools what they would get at VMI. And so when Justice Ginsburg is talking about the alumni support for the institution and that so many, this many people have gone on to be members of Congress and all that kind of stuff, what she's saying is this is different. This is not like all the other universities in Virginia, the public universities in Virginia, and therefore this is a unique opportunity, and if women don't have access to it, then they are being excluded from it. Okay, and so this is the way in which it becomes an exclusion case. Okay, so it's an exclusion case. The argument from Virginia's perspective was that this is not an exclusion case, right? But Justice Ginsburg doesn't read it that way. Caitlin, is that a hand or is that left over? Left over. Okay. All right, so now let's look at the law in the case. All right, are there other comments on this? I wasn't able to read everything in the chat, but let's see. Anything else that anybody wants to say before we turn to the law? So those of you con law folks should recognize the distinction that's being made here, the switch. We didn't really talk at all yet about strict scrutiny and the standard for unconstitutionality in the context of race-based classifications in this course. But we very much see the standard for sex-based classifications in this case from a constitutional standpoint. And so, the standard we get, and I know that those of you who haven't wiped out all of con law, although I keep hearing from you that you're all trying to do that, you should be imagining in your head like the spectrum with the red and the green and the yellow. And remember that it was up on the board if you were in that class, and we saw like intermediate scrutiny, right? And so what we're seeing US versus Virginia is sort of a confirmation of intermediate scrutiny, and really Justice Ginsburg is calling it, like skeptical scrutiny or something like that. She's probably pushing it closer towards strict scrutiny, certainly than Justice Scalia would have liked. But the main point is it's different from race. Okay, and the words that we have to use are an exceedingly persuasive justification. In order to have a sex-based classification, one has to have an exceedingly persuasive justification for that. And so I want to know, did you guys pick up on whether or not Justice Ginsburg said there can be no sex-based classification? Okay, the reason I'm asking is because we saw this strand in our case study of, well, what the Equal Protection Clause requires for race is absolute neutrality. Color blindness cannot happen. You cannot have race-based classifications. Okay, we saw it in the Plessy dissent. We saw it in some of the Brown sort of aftermath cases. We saw it in Justice Thomas's concurrence in the Jenkins case. This idea of strict neutrality, cannot have a race-based classification, cannot even know the race of individuals. Okay, that's sort of what I would call like extreme non-discrimination. Cannot even know the identity of individuals in order to make a classification. What does this case say about sex-based classifications? Does it take that hard line, non-discrimination, extreme view? Or does it say, well, in some instances, you could have sex-based classifications? What did y'all pick up on there? Is Justice Ginsburg calling for an end to all sex-based classifications? Yeah, Chelsea.
No, not necessarily. So it's actually like it can be there, but that the like the challenged classification um, would serve important governmental objectives that the
Mhm.
discriminatory means employed and are substantially related to the achievement of those objectives.
Okay, and so does she talk? I don't know if you saw. So that's the standard. Does she talk about when there might be an exceedingly persuasive justification, even in the schooling context, to have a sex-based classification? Did anybody pick up on that? Heather, did you find anything in there that suggests that Justice Ginsburg was okay with some sex-based classifications?
I don't remember specifically. I was just going to comment on the fact that I was surprised when I got that from the opinion that she was saying that it's okay to classify based on sex sometimes. I don't remember specifically, but knowing what I know about Justice Ginsburg and like the interviews she's had and stuff, she's very like anti all sex-based classifications. So it would have been interesting to read, like, I don't know, like the dissenting opinion or something like that. To like see if she like.
So that's the question. Is she against all sex-based classifications? So Caleb, I see what you've got here in the chat. I don't know if you would mind speaking a little bit out on that point. She is, and the reason I'm asking this question is because we talked in the beginning about how a lot of Virginia's arguments here, defense here, is based on this idea of, well, there actually are differences between men and women, and therefore we can make sex-based classifications. And Virginia loses in this case, and yet Justice Ginsburg seems to be suggesting, as both Chelsea and Heather have said, that sometimes it would be okay to make sex-based classifications. So, Caleb, I don't know if that you've got a question mark at the end of your comment, but let's turn it into a statement.
Yeah, what I was talking about was I think it's at the beginning of, it's like the top of the second page of our reading about USC Virginia. It basically says the court's talking about in limited circumstances how a gender-based classification favoring one sex over another can be all right if it helps out a disproportionately burdened sex, and there's basically a history of it. So that's what I was referring to.
When it is remedial, we can do it, right? What if Caleb, it's a sex-based classification that is maintaining the patriarchy? Would that be okay?
No.
According to Justice Ginsburg?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
But she's carving out this other type of sex-based classification as a sex-based classification that is undermining the history of discrimination. And in those instances, she says, yeah, you can do that. Darius, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was thinking more so like, to answer your question, at this point, no. She's saying that this can't be allowed. Like in the past, to fight the historical suffering, we can compensate women, because I think I'm on page 591. I'm trying to interpret that. And I guess what I bring from that is, like, in the past, we could allow something like this in effort of promoting women being able to get like a better hand of the deal. But now we're not in a situation where we can do that, and that's no longer acceptable. So trying to split the two is not what we're gonna do. But that's,
she says, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's it.
So she says, in this instance, we can't do it. So we cannot make this kind of sex-based classification. So the court ultimately, strikes down VMI's policy. So if what Caleb has said is correct, so Darius, I'm asking you, if what Caleb has said is correct, that Justice Ginsburg seems okay with sex-based classifications that are remedial, but not okay with sex-based classifications that subordinate women or men, but in this instance, women. what does that suggest her conclusion is about this particular sex-based classification? Is it one that is remedial, or is it one that is subordinating of women?
The latter, subordinating.
It's subordinating of women, right? So she's there. So it is on 591. There's this paragraph. It begins with inherent differences, right? Here she's saying inherent differences between men and women we appreciate remain the cause for celebration, but not for denigration of the members of either sex or for artificial constraints on an individual's opportunity. Okay, and then I want you to focus in on the last sentence of that paragraph. Such classifications may not be used as they once were to create or perpetuate the legal, social, or economic inferiority of women. Okay, and so when you see, I want to focus in particular on that middle one, social inferiority of women. Is anybody here having like bells jump off when she's talking about social inferiority? What is her perspective on the question of can law affect social status or social relations here in the sex-based context? Yeah, Lindsay.
Fix inferiority or like address those kinds of social feelings. Yeah.
You said that you said it can.
And that it should.
That it can and should. Yeah. Good. And that's different than what we've seen in other contexts where the court has said, no. If this is a social problem, then the law can't fix it, right? If they're unequal socially, the Constitution has nothing to do with that. David?
Yeah, I mean, when I started talking about the social inferiority, I definitely went back to like the social studies from Brown that they used to prove, why segregation was detrimental, and so, when they started looking at the social studies and the sort of, intangible, I don't know if intangible is quite the right word, but the not necessarily legal rationales for equality, then it just reminded me of Brown and using that rationale for justifying why VMI shouldn't be able to be VMI as it was.
Okay, and we're seeing here, it's been kind of, the Equal Protection Clause makes pretty clear that legal equality is a mandate. You can't say women's vote count half as much as men's vote, or women can't serve on juries, or the sentences for women will be different than the sentences for men when it comes to a crime or something like that. So legal equality seems clear. Economic equality, is it's a little more of a creature of statute, I would say. But this middle one, this social equality, is something that we've really been seeing tugged in both directions. We see people that are pushing for social equality, trying to use the law to get there. And we've seen that resisted from, what I would say are sort of more narrow, strict adherence to the law, right? That the law is the law and the law is not society. And that, and in a lot of ways, we might say that the 60, 70 years after Brown suggest that the law is limited, right? That the law, if it gets too far out in front, it's not going to deliver social equality. And if it does, if it can't do that, then it shouldn't be utilized in this way. Justice Ginsburg's view here is that sex-based classifications cannot be used in that way, but could be used to undermine social inequality. And so she's making a carve out here for what I'm going to call remedial classifications. And that carve out is based on her interpretation of the Equal Protection Clause as something that protects against subordinating of people. Okay. And in this context, we're talking about the subordinating of women, but in other contexts, we might be talking about subordinating of a group based on race or based on disability status or based on age or whatever. Okay, here we're talking about subordinating of women. And I just want to make that distinction between that view and the sort of colorblind, strict neutrality, and non-discrimination view of the Equal Protection Clause, which we've seen pop up in other contexts, right? So here we have Justice Ginsburg giving us an anti-subordination reading of the 14th Amendment, as opposed to a strict neutrality, a non-discrimination reading of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Okay, so you should be sort of identifying that that's a tension, right? Is it okay to be blind? I mean, to be conscious of difference? She's saying, yeah, in certain circumstances. Or must we be blind to all differences? Okay, and so I just want you to hear that difference blindness versus difference consciousness. She's saying in some instances, we can have difference consciousness when it is not, when it is remedial as opposed to subordinating. David, is that a hand back up or are you leftovers? Leftover. Okay. So we know the standard. Now let's sort of start to talk about what Virginia actually argued here. So this is really just kind of walking through the case. They say we can have sex-based classifications so long as there's an exceedingly persuasive justification. So Virginia offers two exceedingly persuasive justifications, or two attempts at exceedingly persuasive justifications. What are those that Virginia offers here? They say we can have exclusion of women from VMI because, what does that accomplish? What does that further for the state of Virginia? We have to have this policy. So, right, if we're backing up into sort of our con law mind, Virginia has done something, excluded women from VMI, but they have the opportunity to justify that, and then it's going to be evaluated. So how might they justify? So Megan, how does Virginia try to justify what they've done?
So they said that the single-sex schools provide educational benefits that contribute to the diversity of education approaches. Mm-hmm. And then behind that, they said that the adversative method would not be appropriate for girls.
Okay, so let's talk about those separately. First, let's talk about the adversative method would not be appropriate for girls. So what's wrong with that justification, does the court say?
So, as I think has already been said, and as Justice Ginsburg says, when they created the women's establishment without the adversative method, they took away all the greatness of the school from the women. They didn't give them the chance. I mean, that's the whole reason the women wanted to apply, was because it was some great institution with this adversative method. And if the women want to apply, why not give them the chance? You don't know that it's not good for girls if you don't do it. Okay.
And what do we know about women and the ability to perform at VMI?
Nothing.
Right. Well, do we know that, is there an interest?
Yes.
Okay. And so there's an interest in some women attending VMI. Okay. Yeah. And so I do want to back up for a second. I said I would talk about the plaintiffs. The United States government is the plaintiff in this case. And I just want to acknowledge for a second how that came to be, right? So the U.S. is involved because there's a non-discrimination statute that says you can't receive federal funds and discriminate based on sex. And so an individual, a woman applied to VMI, was rejected based on sex, and instead of suing directly, she filed a complaint with the Department of Education saying VMI is receiving federal funds and is discriminating based on sex, and she filed a complaint. And the U.S. took it from there. So even though and the U.S. said, yeah, we think so, and so they filed a complaint. And this is the way that this works when the infrastructure is operating correctly. That you bring your complaint to the government that there's a non-compliance with law, and the government then sort of takes the case from there. That's what happened in U.S. versus Virginia. So when I keep saying the plaintiffs, but the plaintiffs are really, the plaintiff is actually the United States. the underlying plaintiff would be a woman who wants to go to VMI. So we know that there is at least some interest, at least one person, one woman who is interested in the adversative method and having a degree from VMI. Megan, did you pick up on what the court said or what was established in the evidence in terms of whether or not any woman could make it through VMI?
I'm not sure that I remember if they gave examples. I do remember Ginsburg telling about what all went on at the school as far as like the bare basics bunks and the yelling and all that. But I don't know if they applied that to women, like if VMI did that as part of their example.
Right. So VMI had an expert who testified in the district court. Keisha, did you see what the expert said on this topic?
Well, some of the examples they gave, I have here in my notes. So it said that women had no opportunity anywhere to gain from the benefits of the system of the education there. And it talked about the physical rigor, the mental stress, absolute equality of treatment, absence of privacy, minute regulations of behavior, and indoctrination of desirable values. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but.
Well, and Megan has told us that there was at least one woman who wanted that, right? Who wanted that experience. And she's also told us that Virginia said, well, we can't give it to a woman because it will ruin the whole thing. Like it can't happen. But
was it VMI or was it Justice Ginsburg that talked about that terrible doctor or medical school guy that said all that trash about how it would stop your cycle and the stress would make you crack?
Okay. So they're picking up on that it is, in general, not going to be attractive as an option for women. But Caitlin, maybe you're seeing what I'm looking for here, which is
page 594 in the middle paragraph. It's this expert's they're quoting the expert that Virginia puts forward. It says, VMI's expert on educational institution testified, undoubtedly there are some women who do, but educational experiences must be designed around the rule, this expert maintained, and not around the exception, talking about that undoubtedly there are women who would be able to complete the physical rigor.
Yeah, so there's this acknowledgement, not only that there are women who would like to try at VMI, but there's an acknowledgement from Virginia's expert saying there are some who could do it. There are some who could do it. And then there's the statement about the exception, making a rule around the norm as opposed to the exception. So, Megan, I'm going to come back to you for a second. What's wrong with this girls can't handle VMI or women will ruin VMI argument? Justice Ginsburg says, no, that can't be an exceedingly persuasive justification. Why?
So at the most basic level, you didn't even give them the chance. Like, you don't know that. You have no proof, no data, no nothing. You didn't even let them try.
Okay. And so the exclusion is based on what?
I guess.
And what is the guess what is the guess and the feeling based on?
An opinion that women are inferior to men.
A generalization about women, right? A generalization that women can't do this, don't want to do this, wouldn't gain from this. And so this is the way in which this particular proffered justification is rejected by Justice Ginsburg and the court here. They say women can't handle, essentially they say women can't handle VMI and or admission of women to VMI will ruin the whole experience. And Justice Ginsburg says, first of all, okay, yeah, there'll have to be some accommodations. We have to acknowledge that there would need to be some sort of, it would be different. But your own expert has said that some women could benefit from it. And so for the people that we're thinking about here are women who would like to go to VMI and could make it through VMI. And Megan, for those women, do they have access to this benefit? this state
No.
provided benefit? No.
No.
And so she's saying, no, you cannot exclude all women based on a generalization that most women wouldn't want to go to VMI. And she, says, and I think it's really clever, most men don't want to go to VMI either. And most men couldn't make it through VMI either, and they are not excluded. So why are women excluded? So she's making a point that a justification for a sex-based exclusion or a sex-based classification cannot be based on an overbroad generalization about the capacities of one sex or the other. Okay, and so she's making it's pretty much a tailoring argument that if you're gonna exclude somebody, it has to be precisely tailored. You have to have a situation in which no women could benefit from this. If no women could benefit from it, then exclude them. Okay, but that's not the case here. It's a generalization. Therefore, this exceedingly persuasive justification is not enough. It fails. Okay, Heather, you got a comment, question?
I have a question. So Justice Ginsburg makes this distinction, but when would something not benefit women as a whole without assumption? Like I'm thinking of like when she said most men don't want to go to the military institute, so you can't just make it so women can't go because you think most women don't want to go. When would there be a situation when you can assume all women wouldn't benefit? That's right? That's what she's saying?
Yeah. I don't know. And so we're going to talk about what, if you're going to have something like VMI, what you would have to do in order for it to be allowed, right? So I want to come back to that in a second, because I think that's the question you're asking, which is if something like VMI is going to persist, under what circumstances would that be constitutional? It seems like in almost all circumstances, any decision based on sex would have to be based on a generalization, right? There's almost nothing that is universally true about all women. And so, I want y'all to keep this in mind when we talk in just a second about like learning styles and, there's one of the notes after the case is talking about, and then the essay is talking about the social science about, learning methods and learning styles and the benefits of single-sex classrooms versus co-ed classrooms, et cetera. So hold that question for a second. I want to come back to the other proffered justification here, which I think Megan told us was that there were educational benefits to single-sex education, which is sort of part A of it, and that there is a state interest in having lots of different options, okay? State interest in having lots of different options. And I guess I want to poll the class, like, are those two things true? That some people benefit from same-sex education, and it is a good idea, generally, for a state to offer lots of different types of schools. What do y'all think? Is that, yeah, Rachel, are those real? Like generalizations we've already talked about, but aren't there educational benefits to single-sex education potentially?
I think so. For certain people, there's certain people that are going to like it more. There's certain people that are going to prefer it. And I think there is a benefit to a state having an all-boys school or an all-girls school. And if people want to go there, they can.
All right, so there's a key part there, if people want to go there.
Yeah, if people
Right.
want to. You shouldn't be,
Right.
well, yeah, it shouldn't be a forcing thing.
Or excluding, right? Either forcing people to go somewhere or excluding people from going from such an option. So this sort of kind of ties back to is this an exclusion or not? It's an extraordinary, unique opportunity at VMI that actually isn't open to women, even those who want to be there. So, but I think that the basic point is correct. Like, yeah, there are educational benefits to this for some people when they want to be there. Okay, what about a diversity of educational options? Rachel, I think you already covered this. From a state's standpoint, are there benefits? Like, how would you frame that as a benefit?
A As a benefit to a person or to the, I guess
To the
to
state, right? So the question is, the state has decided we want to have lots of different kinds of schools, and one of them is going to be VMI.
Mhm.
Is it wise, good policy, a good idea, justifiable for a state to have lots of different types of schools?
Yeah, I think it's cool.
Why would it be good?
Just people, the people all living in the state would have different opportunities, and different people will come to the state to go to these schools. It's good for
Yeah.
everything.
If I want a liberal arts degree, then I go to this one. If I want a tech degree, then I go to this one. If I want military, I go to this one. If I want, a teacher's college, I go, whatever I want. It makes sense for the state to set up a system of public education that has different options. Because if all of the schools are the same, then all the schools are the same, right? If you want something other than that, then you're going to have to go to a private school or go out of state. Okay. So those seem like actually potentially exceedingly persuasive justifications for having a school like VMI. Okay. And I think that the subtext of this case is that even Justice Ginsburg says, yeah, those would be great reasons. But she throws them out. So the court throws them out here. Why? What is the court's problem with these two as justifications for VMI's exclusion of women? We're getting some advanced con law here. In order to be an exceedingly persuasive justification, what must the justification be? Or what's wrong with this one?
Is it to
Yeah.
benefit the oppressed classification, like class?
I think that that's an effect of what she's saying, but I'm not positive that she would limit it so much. Caitlin, yeah.
Okay, so I have a con law midterm tomorrow, so everyone can help me on my facts here. But it looks like the exceedingly persuasive standard needs to be met by the fact that the classification of where to exclude women, the classification serves an important government objective, and the discriminatory means employed are substantially related to the achievement of those objectives.
Okay, so that's the standard. So you're good on standard for tomorrow. But the question is, in this case, why? I think that Justice Ginsburg says these actually are substantial, these are important justifications, right? These would be good, but there's something wrong. There's something flawed about Virginia's use of them to justify VMI. Darius, did you see it? What does the court say is wrong with them using those justifications here? It's not that the justifications are bad. It's what?
I think like something about the alignment with the like the purpose of the school starting out, like the history of it. Like we didn't start out with this idea in mind that this is what we were actually doing. We're just trying to find a compelling argument at this point. And that's not how that works, if that makes sense.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. So she's saying, yeah, those might be exceedingly persuasive justifications, but that's not why VMI doesn't admit women. You can't just make it up now that you're in litigation that, oh, well, actually, this is to create a diversity of educational options. Or, oh, this is actually good because there are educational benefits of single-sex education. When VMI started, that's not why VMI excluded women. And therefore, you can't use those justifications now. And so the law we get out of it is that in order to qualify as an exceedingly persuasive justification, the justification has to be genuine. It has to actually be the reason that you have this sex-based classification. And Justice Ginsburg looked at the record and said, that ain't true here. It has to be genuine, and it can't be, the words they use are post hoc. It can't be a post hoc rationalization for exclusion or a sex-based classification. It has to be a genuine motivation for that. Yeah, Rachel.
I'm sorry, I just have a question. So,
Yeah.
I know part of the problem here was also like the remedy they offered wasn't equal. So if you have a school like West Point or Harvard, that's like West Point, like or VMI, like there's not going to be any school you open for girls that's really ever going to match that school with just the prestige and the history of it. Can you have schools that like you couldn't make a remedy for? You know what I'm saying?
A remedy other than admission?
Yes.
Well, I think that's what Justice Ginsburg is saying is happening here, that there can be no remedy other than opening VMI to women.
So like going forward, we could like, okay, so a school, you either are going to have to admit women. In some states, the rule's going to be you're going to have to admit women, or you could have other states where you would have, okay, we have an all-boys school, but you're always still going to have an all-girls school. Like depending on the circumstances, that there may never be a remedy.
Great. So obviously this case is just about VMI, but Justice Scalia is very much trying to make this case about single-sex education more broadly. And I think that what's animating your question is this idea, well, you know that single-sex education persists, and you might even be convinced that there are real benefits, educational, pedagogical and educational and social benefits to having single-sex as an option for individuals. And so I think what you're ultimately asking is, when could you have it? You know, like what are the circumstances in which you can have it? So let's imagine for a second. So in this case, we know the outcome. It's not a genuine justification to say we have this because it's good for education, right? Because that's not, as Darius has said, that's not why they have VMI exclusion of women, okay? But let's just say, and the article kind of talks about this New York City public school that is a all-girls school. And there's hundreds of single-sex public schools, you know, so I'm going back down into the K-12 environment. So what are the characteristics that have to be present in order for that to survive from a constitutional standpoint? Rachel, you're, I think, hitting on one of them, which is that there has to be a comparable option available for the excluded sex, right? So if you have an all-girls school in New York City, must you have to have an all-boys school in New York City, would you say?
Yes, I would.
What do other people think about that? So the question is what is required in order to constitutionally maintain a single-sex school? If you have an all-girls school, do you have to have an all-boys school? Rachel says yes. What do other people think? Nobody else thinks. Yeah, Chelsea, what do you think?
I mean, so I think practically speaking, yes, you would have to right from the start, because if, like, even if there wasn't necessarily like a want or a need from it, because at some point, like a female only school might hit that prestige level, and now the males want to get in there. And so if you're going to start that, you have to, I mean, at some point it's going to be unequal, but if you start them out at the same, then it's just like, well, this school is just better, not like they have better outcomes, not necessarily like it's because they're female.
This has been an exam question in the past. What if there's an all-girls school that started under these circumstances with a comparable all-boys school, and it turns out that the all-girls school just is better? You know, for whatever reason, it gains in prestige, so that to the point that it is thought to be and have some of the intangibles that are better than the all-boys school, even though there is an all-boys option. Does that become an exclusion case for a boy who wants to attend that school? I think I think it's tricky. That's why it was an exam question. But so comparability, and is, I think, Chelsea, what you're saying, it has to sort of start with these good intentions, and it has to maintain some level of comparability. Am I saying that right?
Right, because then, like, I mean, like, if you just take like two normal in-state schools, right? Like, one might be better, but they have their, it's not a single-sex school, but maybe I can't, like, at the university level, can't get into that school. It's not because I'm a female, like, but I want to go to that one because it's better. I mean, that's where it kind of gets for me, like, where if they start at the same time and they have the same resources, then you could probably keep it justified even if one does better than the other. But if if like the female school starts to get more resources poured into it and the male school is not, then that's where it's gonna, I think you would have a valid argument later down the road.
Do you think that, let's say this all-girls school became really prestigious and more prestigious than the all-boys school? Do you think that the city or the school district, let's say, could defend and say, well, sure, boys can't go to the prestigious all-girls school, but we also have a prestigious co-ed school, and boys can go to that school? Do you think that that would be enough?
So I mean, obviously, like, it depends, right? Like, but I mean, like, if the co-ed school was something that had the same comparable level of prestige, then I would think yes, because it's not like they're totally being denied that prestigious schooling. They just can't do it in only the female school, but they have a actual school that is on the same level as the female school.
Great. And I just want to point everybody to the word she used, not totally being denied, right? This isn't an exclusion case, right? So in order to survive, they have to make it that it is not an exclusion case, that boys have access to a prestigious education. So what? It's not in an all boys environment. They are not being excluded from this opportunity. Okay. But if it becomes an exclusion case, the school district is going to lose. Okay. You know, y'all, if there's one absolute we can get out of this course, it is that when a group is being excluded based on any sort of identity characteristic, the school district is going to lose. Okay. An absolute exclusion will not fly under the Equal Protection Clause. I also want to note from this conversation, we're talking about all girls schools, but we could just as well be talking about HBCUs, right? In the race context, we kind of tiptoed around HBCUs and we sort of acknowledge that HBCUs exist, and HBCUs, you know, create like a kind of tricky way of talking about schooling and separation and segregation. Single-sex schools is the same thing. And so as I read the article for today that's summarizing the book Same, Different, Equal, and it's talking about the divide that occurred within sort of the feminist movement about whether or not there should be like K-12 single-sex schools. It, for me, was just like it was as though we were having a discussion about HBCUs. It's the same idea. And so, you know, another question that you might ask yourself is, what if there is educational benefits to a single race school? Could I set up a single race school, let's say for Asian Americans? Could I set up an Asian Americans only school in my school district? Using these justifications, you know, I want to have a diversity of educational options, and there's studies that show that Asian Americans do well in classes with other Asian Americans. And again, I'm not saying that every Asian American has to go to this school, but I am saying that only Asian Americans can go to this school. Could I do that?
No, that would be an exclusion, right? I mean,
no, everybody else can go to a school.
Well,
they just can't go to this school.
I mean, I guess if it's a private school, no. I mean,
it's not a private school.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think I would still say no.
Say no. What about an all black school?
I mean, I think that it's the same thing, right? Like, no, like you can't, I mean, because now we're not talking about sex-based, we're talking about race-based, and that's a different classification.
It's a different constitutional standard.
Right.
Okay. Takesha, what do you think? Either of these fly? Does my Asian American school fly?
No, it doesn't, but it can be historically for a certain group or a certain sex. So I went to Spelman College, which is a historically Black college, and it's also a all-female college. It's known for cultivating women in this particular race. However, we don't exclude other races. So people from other races can come to the school. And also having the comparable option for males as well. Morehouse College was right next door, as well as Clark Atlanta, which was a co-ed school. So there was no absolute exclusion. I mean, there's exclusion in the sense that men can't go to Spelman or women can't go to Morehouse, but they still have the opportunity to take classes at the institution, which would still not be absolute exclusion, if that makes sense.
But you think that that if Spelman, for example, and obviously Spelman is out of this conversation for a few reasons. One, it's higher ed. Two, it's not public. But a Spelman type school could not have we are a school for Black women. They could be a women's school, but they could not be a Black women's school. Takesha, is that, am I understanding you right? That you think that you couldn't do it based on race? Okay. Caitlin, what do you think? Is anybody going to bite and tell me I can do this Asian American school?
I think that, so when you said that and asked that question, it made me think of Justice Ginsburg's, one of her kind of ways that she rationalized that how single sex schools could be okay, when she said that difference consciousness as opposed to difference blindness is needed when the purpose behind the separation is remedial. So I think if you have some sort of like all Asian school, like post the part, in the United States history where we put Japanese Americans in internment camps, and then maybe we decided that there needed to be some sort of all Japanese American schools so that they could learn, because they were scared of white people putting them, I don't know like what that case would be, but if you could make a remedial reason for it.
And again, and even in this, we have to have a situation in which not all Asian Americans are required to go to this school, but that it's an option. If you as an Asian American want to go to this school, you can. Darius, what do you think? Are you gonna bite and say I can do my Asian American school?
Yeah, but I think Caitlin really answered it really, because that's exactly what I was thinking, is how do you bring it back to like a state interest or just some type of historical context, like, hey, there's some suffering that occurred, I would say, and maybe there's a beneficial reason behind this, and you're just trying to tie it together, because like when she said regarding the Japanese situation, I would just think like that's a compelling or arguably, right, I would think that someone could try to make that argument, or just and I don't know, just keep arguing based on that in some sense. Because I think back to like HBCUs and how they started, and it goes back to like, hey, exclusion was here, we can do this, and I think it's more of a I think it all ties together. I think it's arguably there.
There are state-supported HBCUs. Tennessee State is an example. They are not exclusionary in the sense that no one other than an African American could go to the school, but they
about the exclusionary, like this, the students from the past were.
I got. I think you said everything you said. I think was straight. I think I'm trying to build on it and say, like, we do have publicly supported HBCUs. We do have publicly supported single-sex schools, and the question that we're sort of working with here is, should that be constitutional? Not. Let me back up. If it's like TSU, where it actually isn't exclusionary, then that's a different constitutional question than if it were like an all Asian American public school or something like that, or an all African American public school. And the thing that I think Caitlin and Darius just sort of hit on is, well, if the Equal Protection Clause is about ending subordination, and the reason that you're excluding someone is to remedy prior subordination, well then, yeah, it seems like you could do that under the 14th Amendment. The other perspective is no. And I think, I forget who it was, maybe it was Chelsea said, well, under race, it's a race-based classification. It's a strict scrutiny. It's a high level of scrutiny that has to be involved. And therefore, you couldn't do that with Asian Americans, even if, and so this is where it gets tricky, even if there is a comparable option for everybody. It's just you've set aside one, a school for Asian Americans, or a school for boys, or a school for women. I didn't ask the harder question, which would be if there was a school for Asian Americans, and let's say there was a school for African American students, could there be a school for all white students in such a school district? That's where it starts to maybe feel a little ickier. But could the same arguments be made to justify that kind of school? So we'll continue with this conversation a little bit on Friday. Otherwise, we'll move into our next readings, and I will see you guys then. Hopefully the weather will be just as good on Friday.
Hey, Professor Q.
Yes.
You have 2 minutes.
I do.
There was a question, and I didn't get to put it down like I wanted, but you said it was similar to like a previous exam question. I kind of want to like play around with it, like if you could like reword it, and then if I can, like.
So the question that I mentioned was, a school district creates, they have this research that says single-sex schools are beneficial for women, for girls and for boys. And so they create 2 schools. One is, all girls academy, and one is all boys academy. And over time, what happens is that the all girls academy becomes this like exemplary school. Okay, like the top school in the city, let's say. They have the highest test scores, the best college entrance exam scores, the best college placement, etc. And so there's a boy who wants to go to this school. And the boy sues and says, you can't exclude me from all girls academy because it's the best school in the city, and you can't exclude me from the best school in the city. And so the question is, essentially evaluate that claim. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And probably on the exam, I probably said, and how would you rule? So, the question on the exam would show up like, what are the strengths, weaknesses of the claim that's being made, and how would it be likely to turn out?
Perfect, thanks.
Professor Keel,
Yes.
I was just hoping, I hope I may have just missed this. So what was the answer? You can have 2, if it's a gender, what did we say was the standard of when you can't have? It's got to be comparable?
You have to have a comparable option for the excluded sex.
Okay.
So that may mean, I think some people would say that means you have to have an all boys if you have an all girls. And I think other people would say, no, as long as there is an opportunity, a similar opportunity for the excluded sex. So that was the question I asked, Chelsea, I think. What if there is a co-ed school that's really prestigious and boys could go to that one?
But we really don't know. Like it's going to be just dependent on.
Yeah, I think different people have different feelings on that. But I think that at the bare minimum, you have to have 2 things. 1, a comparable opportunity, which we just talked about. And 2, it has to be an option and not a mandate. And so it can't be that all girls have to go to this school or all boys have to go to that school. It has to be that there is an option other than single sex. So there has to be a co-ed option.
And it's got to be to that prestige, but that would just be dependent on facts, right?
Well, what I'm saying is, so I think those are 2 distinct things. 1, there has to be a comparable option, and that's, I think, where the prestige comes in. 2, you can't have a mandatory sex segregation, just like you can't have a mandatory race segregation. I think you could have, just speaking for myself, I think you can have an all African American high school if you wanted. But certainly you couldn't have a situation in which every African American in the district had to go to the all African American high school. Like that you couldn't have that. So it has to be an option and not a mandate. So you can have an all girls school, for example, but you can't make all girls go to the all girls school. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Do any states have that? Do you know? Like public?
All girls? Oh yeah.
Like
we have them.
We have like all public girl. I didn't know that. That's cool. Do we have an all public boys school?
I don't know. I bet we do, but I don't know the answer to that.
Interesting.
What we actually have a lot of, especially in the middle schools, is schools that are classroom segregated. So they're a single school, but their classes are all boys or all girls for middle school. There's a lot of research that supports that as a model. And again, nobody has to go to those schools, but the principals or the directors of the schools have decided that that's the way they want to set up their school for whatever reason. So you capture some of the benefits of a same-sex education by having the classes that way, but you also avoid some of the scrutiny of, maybe being exclusionary because everybody's there. And plus you create the opportunities, in the lunchroom or maybe
cool.
Some classes. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Either you guys, yeah, go ahead.
My Wi-Fi, I'm at my mom's house, so my computer's not acting the best. But I wanted to answer your question. I don't know if I heard you correctly, but could you repeat the question?
Which one?
The ones that you asked me. You said, is it constitutional to be able to have an all-black school?
Yeah. So like Spelman, except actually making it all black. So all black women.
So I think that you could do that, but you could say it's for all black women, but you couldn't necessarily exclude the other race. I mean, I'm just speaking from my personal experience because it was an all black school, but people from other races weren't excluded from that experience. So it would just be the case where instead of them being the majority, that will be the minority, but they're not excluded. But the experience may not be the same because the way that it's shaped is to benefit blacks.
So let me ask you this real quick. So the easy way to accomplish this is, I think, what you're talking about, which is you make it so that it would be primarily attractive to African-American female students, but you can't say it's only open to African-American female students, right? So that's the easy way to accomplish it. So you say, with your curricular choices or where you locate the school or who you hire to be teachers or principals, you sort of send all the signals that this is really aimed at and geared towards serving African-American female students. Okay, so that's the easy constitutional way to do it. My question is, could you actually say, nope, we are not admitting anyone other than African-American females? And I think you're right that you could definitely do that on the female part of it, but it's harder on the race part. And, but I personally think that you could. I don't know that this Supreme Court would in fact know that the Supreme Court wouldn't say that. But I think as the law currently exists, you could do that so long as not every African-American woman had to go to this school. And also so that other, sort of identities would have access to something, right? To a comparable experience.
Right.
But yeah, so the easy way to do it is the clean way to do it is a way that says we're gearing towards African-American students, but we will accept whoever would like to come, right? Which I think is how Spelman does it, how TSU does it. That's the easier way to do it. It's constitutionally safe. The question is, and this is a question that, comes up in all sorts of different contexts. Does the introduction of even a token or small number of non-Black students undercut the mission of having a specialized school for Black students? I don't know. I think that's the hard question.
Yeah.
That's the argument, is that it would undermine that, and therefore it's kind of the same argument the VMI was making, right? Admitting women is going to ruin our school. They would be saying admitting white students or admitting non-Black students is going to ruin our school. I don't know. I think it's just I think it's, obviously I keep returning to it, so I think it's a fascinating question. But I would be intrigued to hear your thinking over time on it. Like maybe everybody's first gut instinct is no, but that may be everyone's first gut instinct for an all-girls school too.
I don't know what happened to my computer. I thought I was talking, but it didn't seem like you could hear me. So I don't know.
No, I couldn't. I'm sorry. And it was just, it sounded like I could still hear something, but I didn't hear any words. But I figured you must have been having some tech issues, or I was having some tech issues. So no worries.
Okay, thank you.
All right. See you later.